The companies that made lawn darts knew their toy could kill a child, and they fought in court to keep selling it anyway. Their own government had already said it in writing: a mechanical hazard, a foot-long steel spike too dangerous to be called a toy. They could have pulled it. Instead, they kept it on store shelves for 18 more years, long enough to send thousands of children to the emergency room and to kill a 7-year-old girl standing in her own front yard. Here is what most people get wrong about why lawn darts were banned. They think it was one freak tragedy, a single horrible fluke that scared regulators into overreacting. They think lawn darts were a harmless backyard game that the nanny state took away from responsible adults. Or they assume the ban was obvious and automatic, that the moment a child died, the government simply pulled them off the shelves. All three are wrong. Lawn darts had been injuring thousands of children for almost 2 decades before anyone in Washington was forced to act. And the thing that finally forced them was not the government at all. The real story of lawn darts is the story of a loophole. In 1970, the federal government tried to ban these things outright and got talked down to a warning label. In 1976, after the manufacturers fought back in court, regulators locked that compromise in, and lawn darts stayed on shelves for another 12 years, reclassified, relabeled, and just as lethal. In that gap, roughly 6,000 people went to emergency rooms, most of them children, and at least 3 kids died. The outright ban, first floated in 1970, did not arrive until 1988, and when it finally came, it came because one grieving father in Riverside, California refused to stop. This is a story about how a deadly product stays legal, and about who has to die before it doesn't. To understand the danger, you have to understand the object. A lawn dart, sold under brand names like Jarts, was not a toy dart. It was a steel-tipped spike about a foot long, weighted at the front so it would fly point down, with plastic fins at the back to hold it straight. The game itself was simple. You stood across the yard from a plastic ring lying on the grass, and you threw the dart up in a high arc, trying to drop it inside the ring. Thrown by an adult, that meant a heavy metal point falling out of the sky from 30 feet up or higher. By the time it came down, reporting at the time estimated it struck with thousands of pounds of force per square inch, more than enough to punch through a child's skull. It was, in plain terms, a lawn-sized javelin sold for the backyard. The government understood the danger early. In 1970, the Food and Drug Administration, which policed toy safety back then, moved to ban sharp-pointed lawn darts outright, classifying them as a mechanical hazard. That should have been the end of the story, but the agency was talked down. Instead of pulling them, it settled for a conditional ban. Lawn darts could still be sold, as long as they were kept out of toy stores and toy departments, and carried a warning that they were not toys and were meant for adults only. And the industry fought to keep it that way. When regulators pressed for tougher action, the dart makers, led by the largest of them, the company built by the family that had popularized the modern game, challenged them in court and won a compromise. By 1976, now under the newer Consumer Product Safety Commission, the deal was locked back in. Lawn darts held their place on store shelves, sold as adult sporting goods rather than toys. On its face, an adults-only rule sounds responsible. In practice, it was a loophole with a fatal flaw. The product was exactly as dangerous as it had always been. The only things that had changed were the aisle it sat in and the words printed on the box. A label that says adults only does nothing when the object is sitting in a garage and a 7-year-old picks it up. The compromise did not make the lawn darts safe, it just made them legal. And for the next 12 years, the bodies piled up quietly, one emergency room at a time. And the numbers from that period are staggering, because the government was collecting them the entire time. Across roughly a decade, lawn darts sent an estimated 6,000 people to American emergency rooms. These were not adults playing a careful lawn game. 81% of the victims were 15 or younger, and half were under the age of 10. Most of the injuries were to the head, the face, and the eyes. Exactly where a metal point falling out of the sky comes down on a small child standing in a yard. The box said adults only. The injury data said the exact opposite. On April 5th, 1987, the cost of that loophole finally had a name. 7-year-old Michele Snow was in the yard of her family's home when a lawn dart, thrown by a playmate, came down and struck her in the head. The metal tip penetrated her skull and she died of the brain injury. She had not been playing the game. She had not picked up the dart. She was simply standing in her own yard when a backyard product the government had called a mechanical hazard 17 years earlier did the exact thing it had been warned it could do. Michele's father was a 40-year-old aerospace production supervisor named David Snow. And this is the part of the story that matters most, because it is the part that should never have been necessary. When Snow went looking for how this could have happened, he found the 1976 Compromise. He learned that his own government had known these things were lethal and had let them keep selling for over a decade. So he started a campaign alone. He contacted federal legislators, he testified before a House subcommittee. By his own account, he made 7 separate trips to Washington and wore blisters into his feet doing it. It took him about a year and a half. He was not a lobbyist, and he was not a lawyer. He was a father who had buried his daughter and decided that the loophole that killed her was going to close. It worked. In 1988, the Consumer Product Safety Commission voted to ban the sale of lawn darts outright, this time with no toy store compromise and no adults-only carve-out. The vote was 2-0, with one abstention. The commission's language was blunt. A lawn dart, it said, was not a toy. It was a dangerous projectile. The ban took effect on December 19, 1988. After 18 years, roughly 6,000 injuries, and 3 dead children, the conclusion the government had first reached back in 1970 finally became the law. When it passed, Snow said his year-and-a-half struggle was over. He said he had gotten blisters on his feet, but that the day was the payoff. That ban is still in force today, and it is stricter than most people realize. It is illegal to sell traditional metal-tipped lawn darts anywhere in the United States. Not in a store, not at a flea market, not at a yard sale, not on eBay. The Consumer Product Safety Commission has gone so far as to publicly tell anyone who still has an old set in the garage to destroy it. Canada banned them too. The versions you can still buy today are redesigned with blunt or weighted plastic tips, close to the same game without the spike. The original Jarts, the steel-tipped ones a whole generation watched arc across the backyard on summer evenings, are simply gone. Owning an old set is not itself a federal crime. Selling one is. And that is the real lesson of lawn darts, the one that outlives the nostalgia. The system that was supposed to protect children identified the danger in 1970 and then negotiated it away in 1976. The warning labels save no one because warning labels never stop a curious kid in a backyard. They only protect the company that printed them. For 12 years, the math was simple and ugly. A product the government itself had called a mechanical hazard stayed on shelves because the people selling it had more time, more money, and more patience than the families getting hurt. And what finally broke, that wasn't a regulator, or a study, or a lawsuit. It was one father with blistered feet who would not go away. Lawn darts weren't banned because the system worked. They were banned because the system failed for 18 years, and a grieving parent did its job for it. So here is the question for the comments. Did your family have a set of metal jarts in the garage growing up? And did your parents have any idea the government had already labeled them a mechanical hazard? Or did you only find out lawn darts were banned years later, and find yourself wondering how something that dangerous ended up in the backyard in the first place?